out here chasing a feeling. Up high, down low. We go from the floor to the ceiling.
Good morning to you all. Welcome to Feels Out Loud. It is Sunday, and I hope you have found your favorite morning beverage and the coziest space to join us today. This is Martini and Becky McNattin from Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness, and we are so happy that you are listening as we live and share stories of mental health. Good morning.
Good morning.
So excited to talk about, and just what a beautiful transition from last week's episode of intensity and emotions.
Yeah.
And then to say, okay, we're going to take one of those little crayons that we discussed and one of those emotions.
Yeah.
And let's break it down and let's spend a solid amount of time exploring it.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yay. So the first one we are going to do is anger. And we're going to explore anger. And
a really big one.
Which is, yes, huge.
As
right?
we said, we talked about mad.
Mhm.
And certainly anger is just one way to describe mad. How many facets of anger there really are.
There really are, yes. And it's that synonym piece, right? It's mad, it's anger. As a former language arts teacher, I had to start with a quote.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I want to know your thoughts, Becky. Holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. You are the only one who burns from the coal, though. So let's look at that again.
Wow.
Nice little simile we got here. Holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. In the end, you're the only one who gets burned from the coal.
Wow.
What are your thoughts, Becky?
Well, the first thing that I thought of as you read that, the first time I just tried to hear the whole quote. And then the second time it was, okay, which part of that do I stick with or resonate with? And it was the part where you said with the intention of throwing it at someone. The quote doesn't actually say if we do or not.
Right.
So the thought is I'm going to hold on to this thing and I'm going to toss it. And I get this mental image in my head of times even where I've held something hot and it burns and it actually burns. And how sometimes even in my own burn, I don't know if we're able to even successfully throw it.
And that piece of what happens though if we don't, right? Yes, through this example, we get burned. But that piece of, after I reflected, when I found this quote, I was like, wait a second. I think we sit with anger, having the intention of throwing it at someone or expressing to someone way more than we actually do express it. So it's that I'm angry at you, Becky. Like I'm thinking it. And I don't say anything. Okay. Well, one, the only person being hurt and being burned is me because I'm holding on to that anger. And with time, it's only intensifying. Right?
Right.
It has nowhere else to go but deeper and stronger.
Yes.
And so it is that piece of, oh my goodness, we have to release it.
Yeah.
Right? But how do we release it? So,
and we don't necessarily know in the moment where we're feeling that anger.
No.
How to do it, what to do.
Yes. So what I want to do is read you a very short story, and then we'll discuss it after our break. So, and I may just have time for the title and kind of a little background on it. So this is one of my favorite Native American stories. I found this years and years ago, and I don't know what was going on in my life, but it resonated with me so much because I am a visual person, a creative person. And when I read this, it's called Two Wolves.
Well, let's share it. Wait after the commercial break.
Let's do it.
We'll read it after. It's such a great topic. I want to give it its time. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break. Join us when we come back to dive into where anger comes from. We're going to read this story, the benefits of feeling anger, and healthy ways to express and manage it. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud.
Nobody else. All you got to do now. In a world full of strangers, you don't know who to trust. All you see is danger, trying to find what you lost.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud. I am Becky McNattin along with Tara Martini. Let's jump right back into anger, all things anger, and pick up where we left off before the commercial break. Tara, you were just about to read us a story that you absolutely love.
I do. And it just resonated with me so much that I ended up finding a print of it and gave it to my dad. And it hangs in my parents' bedroom as just a reminder every day on which wolf we are choosing. So here is very short, and it is called Two Wolves. A grandfather was walking with his grandson through the woods, sharing his wisdom he had gleaned throughout his 70 years of life. Holding the young boy's hand, the old man began. Within us, he said, are two wolves locked in a constant state of battle. One wolf represents all the good things we seek to be: brave, honest, true, happy, and generous of spirit. The other wolf represents anger, greed, selfishness, arrogance, hatred, and fear. Throughout our lives, the man finished, these two wolves will battle. The young man looked up at his grandfather and asked, well, which one will win? And the grandfather replied simply, whichever one you feed.
Wow. Yeah.
Let's process the story together.
Whichever one we feed.
It is. And how easy, it doesn't say this in the story, but I always think of it after I finish reading, how easy it is and much easier to feed one than the other. It is so much easier to feed the wolf that represents anger and hatred and fear and selfishness, right? To be brave, honest, true, happy, and generous of spirit takes so much more work. Totally worth it, but so much more difficult and so much more work entailed in achieving those things. So, you know, we think of the world that we live in. How many people chose that wolf that represented anger and fear?
It has me thinking, the story has me thinking about how we recognize that these are within us too. It isn't necessarily only about things that happen to us. And so part of what I'm sitting with is this element of decision that we have on our behalf of response, because that's really what the adult in this story is saying. We have some choice on which part to feed. And these are aspects of us that are always there. And so there's an acceptance of it is a part of me, and I get to have some choice in what I do to respond to whatever those parts of me are saying. And so sometimes when we feel angry, there's a helplessness that comes with that. And we talked about some of those aspects of being mad last week and or stressed, or that we feel like it's the world that happens to us.
For sure.
And so much of what the story says is I do have some element to figure out how to respond to it, even if I didn't get to pick that thing occurring.
And it is your choice in the end of it. And it is that piece of, I love what you reiterated, is that piece of all of these things are within us. All of these things are, and it's our choice. The other thing that as you were speaking, it really hit me and kind of got me thinking about the piece of when we feel anger, frustration, fear, isn't it so easy for those feelings to be intensified? Like we can think of a million examples in our life where we felt a bit scared and then that escalated. We felt a bit anger, whatever. But if you look at the other way, when we've been happy or true, we don't naturally are like, well, let's hold on to that and just feel happier and more true.
Let's amplify exuberance.
Yeah.
As we talked about
like
last week.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, it just hit me. Like it is, well, you better, let that happiness out or it's just going to keep being bottled up. Like
it's really interesting. Yeah.
It's because we so easily it's way easier to intensify the negative emotions. Right. And what I love thinking about is, again, I was creating a visual in my head as you were speaking, is I just envisioned these words literally on everybody's chests and in their stomachs, and we're all walking around with them. And how many of us put to choose the positive ones in bold? right? And how many people are walking around doing the opposite?
Well, as I get that mental image too. And part of what we talked about last week was, what are we actually feeling? So when
Mhm.
we experience anger and when we are noting these like parts of self, what is the feeling that we're actually having? And that I think part of what you're saying is feeding anger by we're not necessarily feeding anger by validating it.
Mhm.
Feeding anger is the ruminating about it, the
Right.
thinking about
Not
it,
letting it go.
yes, the
Mhm.
holding on to it, the holding on to
Mhm.
that coal.
Mhm.
So in challenging ourselves to consider, what am I actually feeling, that we mentioned last week, humiliation or hurt is really different from betrayal.
Mhm.
And so when we can understand ourselves more as what's underneath the anger,
Right.
or maybe let's split it out a little bit and
Right.
say, what is this anger about? And we choose to practice curiosity with ourselves
Mhm.
in maybe exploring it more.
Well, and it is just like you said, what is the initiating thing? What is the first? One of the things when I was preparing for this episode that just, I have these moments every once in a while that just blow my mind. And then my first thought is, how in the world have I never thought of it this way?
Mm,
And then two, I just perseverate on that concept like, oh my gosh. So for example, this to me was mind blowing, is that anger is a secondary emotion. You never feel anger as your initial feeling.
mm,
Think about it. So I put some to kind of prove that point or illustrate it. Let's think about these scenarios and let's chat about what really is going on here.
okay.
You're yelling in traffic. You're angry.
Yeah.
Okay. You're feeling anger.
Yes.
But what is that initial feeling or emotion that you were
Ah,
feeling before that?
yeah.
So then I was thinking, well, there's fear. I'm scared I'm going to be late for my presentation at
Yeah.
work. Okay. The first one is a fear and scared. Then I get angry at the
Yeah.
person in front of me.
Maybe worried about what people are going to think of you if you show up late to work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Um, that fear being like that frustration. Another one, screaming at a friend or a partner.
Got
Well,
it.
you're angry.
Yep.
Okay, but what got me there? Wow, if I think about it, it really is, what was it rooted in? It was rooted in frustration because I felt like I wasn't being seen.
Mm.
I was being dismissed.
Or maybe a disrespect.
Yes,
Like
I was disrespected.
my physical or emotional need wasn't being valued.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, it didn't start with, well, I'm angry at my partner. It started with, I'm not being validated. I don't feel valued.
Mhm.
I don't feel heard. And once I started thinking about this, I was like, in any situation, you lose your cool with your children, you get upset at a grade or a feedback of a presentation or a portfolio that you just finished. All of those things, you're not starting out by being angry.
Mhm.
So then it got me thinking, again, the language arts teacher in me, I always say that with students, and there's so many beautiful pieces of poetry and literature that talk about the wearing of masks.
Mm. Yeah.
And it got me thinking, holy cannoli, anger is a mask.
Wow. Yeah.
I see that you are angry. Okay, well, you see that because that's the mask I'm wearing. But within it, that mask is serving to protect us, that more vulnerable underlying emotion,
Mhm. Yeah, well, you're
right?
describing kind of anger as in those moments, in your examples, kind of an offensive. Like
Yes.
we move out
Yep.
as a way to. It feels very self-protective.
Hmm.
That that sometimes anger is this way of self-protecting
Hmm.
the parts of us that feel wounded, the parts of us that feel some of those like real vulnerable emotions that you and I were highlighting last week,
Which is scary.
which is very scary. And you think about, just recently, even I hurt my finger. This was right around the holiday time, and I was cutting things, and I cut my finger, and instantaneously, my family members came over to say, like, can I help you? And I went, get away. And I kind of yelled at it
Yep.
in a way I didn't want to make the hurt worse. And I didn't necessarily know that in the moment, but I can think about it now that it's like, if you touch it, it's going to feel worse than it does right now. And we move into ourselves to kind of protect against whatever the bigger pain might be.
Right.
So I hear you in what you're describing as I am driving to work and I'm frustrated at the people and I yell in my car, or I get upset with my partner, or I'm mad at my coworkers, when perhaps that angry response is a feeling that we're trying to protect ourselves from
what we're really feeling.
Right.
And also that piece of, though, as you were sharing your story about cutting your finger or your hand, I thought you were doing it because you didn't want to make the pain worse. But then the flip side of it, but how do you think that was received by your family?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they're like, whoa, Mom, chill out.
Yes,
we're
right.
just trying to help.
Yes. Highly rejecting.
Yes.
And perhaps even sort of explosive, maybe disrespected, because their intention was to show up with kindness and compassion.
Well, yeah, they're leading with love.
And maybe even protection themselves. Like they're trying to protect me. So there's a wound on that side of, I was not owed this.
Right. Yeah, it is. And then taking it a step further of, well, then would anyone take the time to go, sorry, how I responded was explosive. And what I really was struggling with is I didn't want the pain to become worse, right? How often do we not take the time to explain to our loved one how that is? And I know that cutting your hand is a small example. Think big picture, right? You're in this huge, gigantic fight with a family member or a partner. And how many times do we not take that opportunity to say, you know what? This is why I showed up as angry. I didn't feel seen or heard. I felt disrespected. There's no way that there's going to be any conflict resolution if we don't share of ourselves that layer of take off the mask of anger and please be willing to be vulnerable and share with your loved one what's behind that mask, what's behind that anger.
Yeah, like it makes me think about how different a conversation is if someone went, and this would be repair, and maybe to the story of the two wolves, we are feeding love when we feed repair. Going to someone and saying, I was responding to my own need to protect my humiliation. I can't think of a time that I've heard someone say it like that.
Right.
But I'm putting myself in that spot of, if someone were to come to me and say, anger showed up because anger needed to protect betrayal in that moment, or anger needed to protect deep hurt, or anger was protecting my fear of the unknown. That's like incredible.
Isn't it?
And I think I would maybe be so surprised at that response even, that I think I might say, whoa, I'm like almost even done being mad back at you because I'm so surprised. But what a recollection that is, if we could even know in ourselves that, one, we were kind of protecting another feel, as you're mentioning, and then saying that to somebody as a part of feeding the love in the relationship.
Right. And that it just leads to understanding more and deepening that connection. And it's that piece of, think of it, if you are in that argument or whatever it is that it almost lends itself to giving anger not so much of a negative connotation, because anger is serving you because it's protecting you.
It's a beautiful protection. Well, it also, as you're talking, it makes me think about the moments that I show up as angry when I'm not even angry about that thing that's in front of me. In our line of work, we call that displacement. That maybe I'm angry about a thing over here, but there is this personal challenge around it might not be caused by you, but you are who I'm angry with.
You're the target right now.
And I maybe don't even know that. I haven't even thought about that. But that noting to self, okay, well, what is the anger protecting? And is it even from, maybe if we're more curious, is it even from our exchange, or is it from something else?
And it can be something completely different. How many times do we talk to our friends or our clients and we say, they'll come in and say, my roommate was so mad at me, or, one of our children is like, my friend is so mad. And how many times do we say, I bet you it has nothing to do with you?
Yeah, well said.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are going through something. They are struggling, but you just happen to be the first person they saw, right? You happen to be that person that's coming out as anger. And so we're seeing that as, why are they angry at me? When it's not, is what is that anger protecting? Right? And so many times all of that happened before you even encountered that person, right?
Absolutely.
And so again, that's a great example of our one of our first episodes of leading with compassion and curiosity. Now, we know this is easier said than done, right? Like every angry
completely
person
easier said than done.
Yes. We are not saying this is easy. What we're saying is just, even if you really put it on a Post-it note, challenge yourself to once a day. When you encounter an angry person, what if you look at it from that compassion and curiosity lens and that mask? What lies beneath that mask? And I think our approach then at other humans will be so different, right?
Yeah. And that sense of personal acceptance around what's going on for us. What are insecurities of our own are showing up in that moment, that anger is sort of lashing out. And rather than maybe even to fight with anger, that it feeds love to wonder about anger.
Yes.
They are parts of us. And so that it's part of the profoundness of that story. And we actually feed love when we respond to ourselves with not a criticality and judgment about, why are you feeling that way? Don't be mad at people.
Right.
But to really say to yourself, what am I trying to protect? What am I trying to keep myself from feeling more of?
Yes.
And with a kindness about that.
And that piece of, just like you said, is why meet anger with anger, right?
Yes.
Meet it with something else. And that's going to make a huge difference, because I guarantee I am not the only one here in this world who, when you're in an argument, all I'm doing when the person's mad at me is I'm ramping up my anger inside. And I'm like, let's go.
Yes. We're ready to
Right?
spar.
Yeah. And I am meeting that anger with a higher intensity of anger.
Yep.
When rather, if we didn't play defense and we just looked at, I wonder what that person's going through, right? What event led you to be so angry? What did a person do? What event happened? Use it as a text of exploring and connecting rather than win or lose.
Yeah.
Right? Which, oh my gosh, every conflict would be resolved in a more peaceful, loving manner if we viewed it through that lens.
Well, we would be certainly feeding love as an acceptance that all emotions are owed space. And
yes.
And that I don't think the story is telling us that it's wrong to feel anger, that by even feeling it, we feed it. It really is that emotions are going to be a part of our lived experience, and to embrace those,
honor them,
maybe even physically with other people and ourselves, and how that is actually feeding love and compassion, and that one particular wolf.
Yes. And then that wolf, the one that's going for the positive things, that's one you're feeding. Random tidbit. I was thinking about this on whether we're talking to clients or a friend. And I've heard people, and this has happened to me all the time too, where I'll feel a sense of anger and have no idea why, because I'm like, maybe, hey, I didn't interact with any humans today. Why am I angry?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But it's taking the time to also realize that other humans don't have to be our source of anger. It can be our environment.
Mm,
So then it's also looking at how can I adjust to the environment around
excellent
me,
point.
right? Because I'll think about it where, let's say the holidays just passed, you're having family over and everyone's joyful and loving and there's connection and all those beautiful things, yet you find yourself angry.
Yeah.
And this happens to me anytime there's a big gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand where it's coming from because everyone's full of joy. It's that to me, if I take a step back of why am I so angry and irritated,
Mm-hmm.
I'm overstimulated,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
right? I need to retreat a little bit, find a spot that's quiet. So much of our emotions are driven by our environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have someone arguing outside in your neighborhood and you're sitting there and you're thinking, why am I getting unregulated?
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with like my home. It's that I can hear the conflict outside.
What's happening around you?
Right. And it's that piece of acknowledging it and changing that, changing our place in that environment to create more harmony, which I think a lot of people, it's so confusing because they don't understand, right, where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And that maybe we're saying to ourselves in that also, I need to understand where it's coming from even before I acknowledge the feel. When
yes.
what you're getting at is also maybe just the experience or process of validating the emotion, we then can maybe get a framework on what it is. We don't have to know that before we do something
Right.
about it. We can say, I don't really even know why I'm angry right now. You mentioned in the party, I was at a party recently where it wasn't until much after the fact I realized, gosh, I'm really jealous. I'm super jealous. I feel mad right now. What am I and asking myself later, what am I mad about? This
But
is
how
just like a
cool that you
joyful experience.
realize that.
And that we don't necessarily need to know in the moment
Mhm.
why we feel a certain way or what it's rooted in before we take some action to respond to the emotion. That would be leaning into love and curiosity immediately, and then just trusting, hey, clarity might come.
And it may, and you're holding space for it at
Mhm.
least.
And so when you use the overstimulation part, you can say, I'm going to take a moment away
Mhm.
and then just give myself some room to think about what I'm angry with right now.
Mhm.
What came to you at that time was, oh, is this like too many inputs?
Yep.
And
I just need to step away.
and think about if at the same party, I'm really jealous of something and you're very overstimulated. They both show up as anger. And we
Mhm.
need very different things then in terms of
Yes.
responses to how our anger showed up. When we really challenge ourselves to ask, okay, if this is the way it shows up, if anger is the operationalizing, what's underneath that? Overstimulation is super different from am so envious of what I'm
Completely different.
bearing witness to.
Mhm.
So envious.
But
Both
we both look angry.
we both look angry. And there's elements of pain in both of them.
There are.
But think of how misattuned we are to ourselves if all we did was sit with, I'm angry. And didn't ask some more questions, even if it's after the fact, even if we just respond with, I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to
Right.
separate myself for a bit, but to split out that emotion more fully, which is what we're talking through today.
Mhm. Yeah, and it is. And I go back to, and we say this all the time, but imagine if we all did that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's a million things we could talk about today because we always overplan big time. So I want to make sure that we address, to me, the most important part of this whole episode, which is, well, how can we manage our anger in a healthy way?
Mm.
Well, what in the world? We're talking about like different words to describe anger and where we feel it in our body and all these things. But everyone can be listening. Well, okay, that's great, you guys, that you're exploring it, but what do I do when I'm feeling it?
Yeah.
And how can I express that anger in a healthy way?
Yeah.
So are you okay if we just go through a list of things and
Let's do it.
talk
Yeah.
about if we find these things effective? Now,
Yes.
I always feel that with this first one, there's always a funny story that could be attached to it. It is to write a letter or an email to the person that angers you, but don't send it.
Yeah.
Now, why is she laughing, folks?
Well, good. Well said. I love this strategy.
Mhm.
One, it's you're talking to somebody who enjoys writing a lot, so of personal bias here. But I think it's so powerful to externalize the emotion and find sometimes it is what helps us find words.
Mhm.
When we also say, I'm not going to actually say any of this to the person who I'm feeling angry with. How many times, even for myself, it's helped me recognize, as you and I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, I'm not actually even mad at them.
Right.
I may be angry with me.
And then it's revealing by what you're writing. You're like, whoa,
Yes.
I actually feel this way. Now, why we giggled initially is I guarantee there's someone out there, or both of us, either ourselves have done this or know someone who you accidentally hit send and the letter was received or email was received. That's not what we're talking about, folks.
No.
We're talking about literally you don't send it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that piece. And it is. You get to express yourself. You also are going to find out things about you if you
Yep.
take the time to do that. Now, the second one I've actually started to implement, and it's been crazy effective. And I want to give the person the credit in that. Have you heard of, Becky, the 30-30-30
No.
intervention?
No.
Okay, well, this brilliant person named Laura Beth Moss, who is a supervisor with the National Anger Management Association and the creator of this method, came up with this thing called the 30-30-30 intervention. And how cool if we could implement this, whether it's in our office, our homes,
Yeah.
at work. So here's what we do. First, she says, take 30 seconds to extract yourself from the situation, perhaps by leaving the room or stepping outside,
Okay.
which we kind of just touched on the idea of like,
Yes,
is
we
this
did.
environment triggering? Step out of it.
Yep.
So first thing, you find yourself angry, take some time, get away from the situation, perhaps leave the room or step outside. Then spend 30 seconds doing anything else than perseverating on why you're angry,
Mm-hmm.
like a set of breathing exercises, or think about what the plan is for dinner,
Got it.
what ingredients you need, or where you're going to go out to dinner. All that does is gets your mind off of that feeling of anger.
What a great strategy. So totally take your mind off of what
Yes.
you were having the angry feels about.
And how great, because that's so easy, right? If Becky and Tara said, well, let's process through our anger. Oh my goodness, that seems exhausting. But if it literally is think about anything else
Yep.
other than
Yep.
the anger. So it's 30 seconds to leave the situation, leave the room or step outside. 30 seconds to think of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, use the final 30 seconds to create a coping statement. So a statement to ourselves that will help de-escalate your emotion of anger.
Okay. Like a short sentence, you're
Yep.
saying. Okay.
Yep. And think of that. So I put an example just because I feel like examples are the best way to illustrate. Like, well, what do you mean by a coping statement that's going to make me less angry? Well, let's say you're a college student or an adult who has a roommate. I'm bothered by how my roommate is treating me. So that's that thing
Yep.
that I feel angry about. So it's acknowledging I am bothered by how my roommate is treating me. But I know this has nothing to do with me. This issue is with her. So it goes from I'm acknowledging, because it is okay to feel the feels. I'm acknowledging that I am angry. Well, why are you? It's because I'm bothered by how my roommate is treating me. I am bothered by how angry my boss just got at me.
Mm-hmm.
but I know that his anger has nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Well, it makes me even think about that statement. So 30 seconds, we remove ourselves. 30 seconds, we think about something totally different. 30 seconds coming up with a statement, even like, I will think about my feels after my workday. Like,
Yes.
I am really upset with my supervisor. I'm really upset with my coworker.
Mhm.
I will give myself time after work today to really ponder this.
Yes.
Helps us in that moment say, I can even tie this up right now, because I'm thinking about all sorts of 30-second statements we
Right.
could make
Right.
based on what you said was a coping statement that will de-escalate our emotions
Mhm.
in that moment. The statement could even be, you are a loved being.
Yes.
Sweetie, calm down.
Yes. Or I am doing my best. So
I'm
it's your
doing-
boss who's yelling at you.
Yep.
It is, my boss might be angry, but I know I am doing the best I can with what I have at my work.
30, 30, 30.
30, 30, 30 people. So I feel like all of us can do that.
We
How
all can do
great.
that. Yep.
Okay, so quickly kind of going through the rest of the list. This one is about as simple as can be. And I feel like if there's one thing every therapist tells their client is pause and take deep breaths.
Yeah.
No matter how you're feeling, even if you're feeling joy, whatever it is, just pause and take 3 deep breaths.
Mm-hmm.
And how amazing that is for our body and our minds and our hearts.
Mm-hmm. It really is regulating.
Yeah. Do any physical activity. Go for a walk. Go for a run. Clean. I am an angry cleaner.
Me too.
I am a stressed cleaner.
Me too.
When I get stressed or angry, this is why we're such good friends. My house has never been more clean.
Mm-hmm.
Which then people should wonder if they step into my house and it's just immaculate. They're gonna be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, Sarah was feeling some big feelings recently." The other piece that, and I use this a lot with children that I know, or I'm working with, is aggressive scribbling or coloring. Have you ever done this?
Yes, I have.
I mean, where you can just like burn that circle through your paper.
Yeah.
It is such an amazing physical thing, and it works mentally as well, of you're letting that anger go through your body and out your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of colored and crayons, what a beautiful exercise to do
Right.
with all those.
Where you could even take a color that seemed to symbolize what even anger looked like.
Yes.
And it could show up in a
Yes.
color.
Mm-hmm. There's always a good scream. Go outside, go somewhere private,
Yep.
and just scream, because the anger needs to go somewhere rather than stay in your body.
Yep.
This one I thought of because I know someone across from me who's really good at dance parties.
Mm.
And what about a rage dance party, an anger dance party?
Yeah.
Right. Think of,
An
and
anger
I've done,
dance list.
yes, and I've done this with people I've worked with in the past and just friends or loved ones, of let's create a playlist of songs that let that anger out.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you speak to the way that music can validate the anger feel, both in the musicality and then in the lyrics too.
Yes.
So music can be a high emotion validator. We don't necessarily need a person in our world to do it.
Right. It's just great. A couple of, I would say this one is a big trend right now, are those rage rooms
Mm-hmm.
where you'd go and destroy stuff. And it's just, you are destroying to let that anger out. And the last one before we head out today, which blew my mind as well, is stop repeating the story of your anger, because stories sustain anger. Think of that.
Yeah.
Stories sustain anger. We find freedom. You will find freedom from anger. You recognize the story and acknowledge that repeating it doesn't serve you. All you are doing is repeatedly bringing the past into the present.
The past into the present.
Yes.
And what that impacts us. So many things. We are going to head to a commercial break now, but Feels Out Loud will be back shortly to talk through listener questions about expressing anger. Stay tuned, everyone.
You gotta find the people Express yourself.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this is the part of the show where we talk through questions from our listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics on each week that you would like to process through, please email us. Our email address can be found on our show link too. We really do want to hear from you and take time every week to wonder together about the topics on people's minds. So today we're talking about anger and listener questions about anger.
We are. So thank you to our listeners who sent in questions. I love this first one because I just think it speaks and resonates with every human on this planet. This person says, say I'm in an argument with my partner and they always respond the same way. When I ask them how they're feeling during the fight, I'm mad. I hear you, sister.
Yep.
Is it rude if I ask them to use a different way to describe the feeling of being mad?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Is it rude?
And here was my first thought. Is it rude? No, depends on the delivery. But before I answer the question, let's look at it from their viewpoint. So how would your partner feel if they respond and they say, I'm mad? How would you feel if while your emotions were high, your partner said, could you please find a different way to describe that feeling of being mad?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the anger would only intensify.
Mm-hmm.
And during a time of anger, and this was one thing we didn't have time to discuss earlier, but anger affects our memory. When we are angry, while that is happening, we are less likely to be able to take in what is happening at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you said, well, last week in our fight, you said blah, 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 and the person's like, I don't remember. And you're like, what are you saying? I'm lying?
Mm-hmm.
No, they really may not remember because
Yep, totally could be.
anger affects that. So it's that piece of, okay, well, don't come across as responding with frustration, but curiosity. So view it as a moment of connection and figuring out. So maybe you say instead, like, what got you to feeling mad?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not please change the word you just used because I hear it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, what got you there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or what could I have done differently? Right? You're coming from a place of connecting and wanting to resolve it rather than just matching it with that anger piece.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts on how else that person could respond?
Yeah, one of my ideas for this listener is to perhaps bring it up at a time where there isn't huge escalation. So in the moment of an argument or high emotions, high intensity, don't go to the cerebral in that time. That's not a time for meaning making and understanding anyway. We may not be able to do it. So I'm wondering about bringing up it at a time where maybe things are slightly more stable. I want to understand that anger a little bit more. I want to understand mad. Can you help me understand it? And so highlighting it at a moment that it isn't the conflict isn't as high.
Right. And then the other piece with it too, and you bring up, that's such great advice of the biggest time or the time that's going to allow for the biggest amount of change and progress is when things are not intense, when the emotions are not intense.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been around people where I'll say, like, I don't want this conversation to start a fight. I truly am just wanting to understand you.
Yep.
And then leading that or following up with whatever my concerns are and things like that. And that right away creates a point of that person's not going to be defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh.
Well, and to end the show with this idea that we know that anger may be protecting something. We know that it may be. So if you understand that it's protecting something, you can find that out later.
Yes.
Meet that need for protection in that moment at that time.
Exactly, girl.
Wow. We are already at the end of our show today. Thank you for listening this morning. Have you heard of anger languages? Join us next week at 9, where we talk through the 5 languages of anger. Until then, remember your voice is one the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
See ya.